This video is sponsored by Ground News. There really is no way to sugarcoat it. The last couple of days have not been good for the European Union. As you've probably noticed, the European Council, which is made up of the 27 heads of state in our union, including the Commission President and the Council President, met for a very long summit to discuss two massive topics. Topics which, in our view, are critical for our strategic autonomy. This includes the reparations loan for Ukraine and the Mercosur trade agreement with South America. And neither got a happy year end, which frankly is infuriating. Anyway, let's briefly rewind and explain what this reparations loan is all about. Basically, around 215 billion euros of Russian state money is frozen right here in Europe, most of it in Belgium. The EU can freeze it, but it can't legally take it. And on paper, the money still belongs to Russia. At the same time, though, Ukraine is running into serious financial trouble. From next year onwards, there's a huge hole in its budget, and it needs cash fast. So the EU, pushed especially hard by Germany, came up with an idea to use frozen Russian money to help Ukraine. The plan was super simple. The EU would lend Ukraine money backed by Russia's frozen assets. And Ukraine would only have to pay it back if Russia one day pays war reparations. In other words, if Russia never pays reparations, Ukraine never repays the loan. But of course, that did not happen. And it's mainly because of one man, Bart De Wever, the Prime Minister of Belgium. You see, Russia's assets are mostly frozen in Euroclear, a Belgian clearing company. De Wever argued that Belgium would be the first in line if Russia sued or retaliated, and that using frozen state assets could set a dangerous precedent and scare off investors, and that Russia could retaliate in other ways too. But honestly, the EU moved mountains for Belgium and De Wever. They offered guarantees to cover any lawyer costs, reimbursements of the loan if ever the ECJ ordered them to pay it back, and the possibility of offsetting any losses from Russian seizures by seizing other Russian assets in return. So in my opinion, this looks a lot more like national politics taking precedent. Opposing the plan was popular in Belgium, and politically it let De Wever look super tough. You know, the leader standing up for Belgian interests against the big EU establishment. Now, with the reparations loan dead on the floor, the summit looked like a total disaster. But in the early hours of the morning, at around 4 a.m., the European leaders pivoted to a plan B, a 90 billion euro rescue package funded by Eurobonds. This means that the European Commission will go to the global markets and borrow the 90 billion euros directly, backed by the collective EU budget. This sounds like a win, right? So why are we calling it a loss? Because the risk shifts from Russia to the European taxpayers. If Ukraine can't repay and Russia never pays reparations, we are left with a 90 billion euro bill. And borrowing 19 billion euros isn't free either. The EU now has to pay interest, adding billions in extra costs. And the real damage isn't even financial. It's political. This is the third year in a row that Europe has chosen to protect Russian assets over decisively backing Ukraine. And that sends a super clear message to Putin. We fear your lawyers more than your tanks or your drones. And what's fascinating is how differently this exact decision was framed across the media. The story was widely reported across Europe, with more than 400 news sources. And if we look at bias comparison, left-leaning outlets framed the EU's 90 billion euro loan as a way to save Europe's credibility, even calling it a win for the bloc. Centrist coverage mostly stuck to the facts, describing it as a compromise and another round of joint borrowing. Right-leaning media, meanwhile, called the massive loan a burden on European taxpayers, and calling the decision not to use frozen assets a small victory for common sense. Three narratives, same judgment, very different framing. And that difference, not from politicians, but from news reporting itself, is exactly where Ground News becomes super useful. Their platform lets you see how the same story is reported across the political spectrum, so you don't get stuck inside just one narrative. You can even view bias distribution, and in this case, far more left-leaning outlets covered the ruling compared to right-leaning ones. Scroll further down and you can see every article. Left, center, right, each rated for factuality, ownership, and political lean. If you'd like to try it, you can get 40% off the Vantage plan using the link in the description or the QR code on the screen. Alright, let's get back to the video. So, that was the failed reparations loan for Ukraine. Now on to the next mess, Mercosur. This trade deal with South America has literally been in the making for 25 years. Very quickly, let's remind ourselves why Mercosur actually matters. First, it opens up one of the world's most protected markets, more than 280 million people, to European exports. And unlike the US, where Europe is now facing 15% tariffs, this deal would slash tariffs to close to zero. In fact, tariffs would be cut on 91% of everything Europe currently exports. And that is massive. For industrial goods, today's high tariffs, which you can see on the screen, would eventually fall to zero. And that's especially good news for countries like Germany. And for agricultural goods, most tariffs would also eventually be scrapped, with some quotas remaining. That's still very good news though for exporters in countries like France. And then we get to the more sensitive stuff. Things like honey, rice, sugar, and especially beef and poultry. And this is what made farmers, especially French farmers, furious. They really hate the Mercosur deal. For them, this isn't trade, it's unfair competition. As South American farms face looser health and environmental rules and have significantly lower labor costs. Now, in Brussels' defense, the quotas are actually quite small. The beef quota equals roughly 1.5% of the EU's total annual beef consumption, and for poultry, that's about 1.3%. Still though, for farmers, even small percentages feel like a real threat. And that's the part that made several governments lose their nerve. Again. Supporters of the deal include Germany, Spain, and the Nordic countries. They argue it would boost exports hit by US tariffs and reduce Europe's reliance on China. Opponents include France, Italy, and Poland. And it was Italy that ultimately tipped things over. After a phone call with Brazilian President Lula da Silva, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said she supported the deal, but maintained that Italy still needed more time to create stronger guarantees for its farmers. Apparently, the 25 years weren't enough. And today, Ursula von der Leyen was supposed to fly to South America to finally get the deal signed. But once again, Europe's leaders failed to back it. No endorsement, no signature. And the deal is now postponed, officially until January. But honestly, who knows? This is what I think. It's very difficult for me to hide my disappointment here, because I really thought that after that strategy document that the US released a couple of weeks ago, the European Union would respond strongly. And signing Mercosur and allowing the reparations loan to go to Ukraine would have been a very, very strong response. And instead, we got neither. And yes, the 90 billion euros we are now borrowing from the capital markets and lending to Ukraine is definitely not a bad step, but it's like the bare minimum. It's just, again, doing so little so late. And I think my biggest disappointment here lies with our leaders, and mainly Merz and Macron. These two leaders have stood for European sovereignty and European strategic autonomy for months now, and in Macron's case for years. And we have very little to show for it. And on a night like this, when we can diversify away from US trade, Macron is blatantly against it, and Merz apparently doesn't have the power to push it through. That's poor for the two biggest countries in Europe. And let's also briefly talk about our European farmers, because honestly, I'm growing rather tired of them. Let's not forget, when we look at the EU budget, they receive the largest slice in farm subsidies. And if we look at Mercosur, there's plenty of safeguards for our farmers to protect them. And if we look at the beef coming from South America in the Mercosur agreement, it's only up to 1.5% of the entire EU consumption. That really is not a lot. And with all of those things in mind, if farmers still end up going bust, then honestly, maybe they deserve to go bust. It's still a market economy in the end of the day, and I think we are doing enough to protect our farmers. So let's really hope, with all of that being said, that at least the Mercosur agreement in January, that we get it signed. We need it signed. We have a 15% trade barrier with the US. We need to diversify. And after Mercosur, I'd like to see India, Indonesia, and Mexico. Let's just make it happen. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. And if you want to dig deeper into media bias and understand how stories are being framed, check out our sponsor, Ground News. You can get the Unlimited Access Vantage plan with 40% off by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. And thank you to our presidents: Jan Schauke, Christian Peter, Alexander, Daniel Eupedia, HVD Kiki Loxen, Rashid Steffen, Unite Europe, and Europe. See you in the next video.